I believe that I was created in my creator's image. Then whatever it is that is the manifestation of divinity that made, and the way I think about it is whatever it is that decided that there should be bees and trees and volcanoes and pickles and whatever else also decided that there should be a Sonya Renee Taylor.
Yes.
And so I can't be any less divine than all of those creations.
Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Jumpstart Your Joy here on YouTube. I'm really excited to be sharing this conversation with Sonya Renee Taylor. She is the author of The Body is Not an Apology and The Body is Not an Apology Workbook. Sonya, of course, is an activist and an author, and as you'll hear, she's also been a poet for many years. She now also leads the foundation, The Body is Not an Apology, which talks about radical self-love, which is what you're about to hear all about. I am excited about this conversation because you will hear her background and how she came into starting The Body is Not an Apology. Plus, my background is in religious studies, and I am always fascinated about the messaging that we receive from institutionalized religion and what it means for our own personal selves. You will get to hear Sonya talk about how the role of the messaging that we receive from institutionalized religion impacts what we feel about our own worthiness. This is fascinating, and I can't wait for you to hear it. Welcome to the show. This week on the show, I am so very honored to have Sonya Renee Taylor joining me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Such a treat to have you here. Of course, you're the author of The Body is Not an Apology and the brand new workbook, which I do have right here and very much enjoyed. Woo, it's going across the screen. Your Body is Not an Apology Workbook, Tools for Living Radical Self-Love. And the first question that I like to ask everyone is tell us about what you loved most as a child or in school. What were your earliest sparks of joy?
What were my earliest? So I have always been a bit of a performer. I've always loved performing, whatever. I was born an extrovert. And so I loved creating worlds. I think I've always been interested in like sort of what do they call it, anthropomorphism, when you animate things that are not animated. And that was me. So I made the toothbrush and the toothpaste talked, and the wash rag and the soap talked, and everything talked. Which was much to my parents' chagrin. They were like, you talk enough, we don't need all the other things to talk to. But that was definitely one of them. And my best friend and I have been best friends since we were 10 years old, which is bonkers when I think about it. We used to do these recordings where we would interpret like the Sally Jesse Raphael show or the Don show.
Oh my goodness.
And they were always it was terrible. The shows were always about the Catholic Church and molestation. And I don't know why those were always the shows, but they were always the shows. And then we would do the shows, and we would also do the commercial interludes. So we would do the Florida orange juice commercial, or the Iron Man beer commercial, or the, so-and-so singing lessons commercial. I mean, we have full-on productions. Yeah, that was probably my biggest joy as a child.
So amazing. My best friend and I, at age 10, we also started a radio program on our tape recorder. It was PLTS, which please listen to this station.
I love it.
And there was some, neighborhood news reports. She then became a reporter, and here I am. Do you want to talk a little bit about how some of that performance maybe has tied through in what you do today?
Sure. I was always going to perform in some way. I think it was just very much who I was. And thank goodness my parents found a channel for me relatively early. In 5th grade, my music teacher was like, she should go to the performing arts school. And so I went to performing arts school from middle school through high school, where I majored in musical theater and theater. And then I left that, and I thought when I graduated high school, I was like going to go to NYU and study theater. I chickened out of all of my auditions, every single one.
Oh, wow.
Um, and instead, I ended up going to Hampton University, which is a historically Black university in Virginia. And I majored in sociology. And like my thought at the time was like, I am not going to be poor waiting tables, waiting on my big break. Now, I don't know what made me think majoring in sociology was gonna was gonna offset whatever financial issues I thought I was gonna have, but that was my
Yeah.
thinking at the time. Um, but I still, I sang in concert choir in college. I did musicals in college. Performing was always going to show up in some way. It's such a central part of my identity. And then after I got out of college, I had a couple of years where I didn't do anything that felt particularly, you know, artistic. I did do a play. There was like a church related play. I did that.
Mhm.
Um, but then in 2003, um, I happened to stumble upon open mic poetry. And
Mm.
I was like, oh, wait, I can like get on stage and do my own little 3-minute play. Like,
Amazing. Yes.
I was like, it only cost me $5 to like get up and do my own show every night. And so I started going to open mics religiously. And then shortly after that, discovered Poetry Slam,
Yeah.
competitive performance poetry. And it was like, I had landed on the holy grail. I was like, wait a minute, I can do my own show. Like I can write my own poem, I can perform it, and then if I win, you'll give me money. Like yes, 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 sign me up. And that quickly became not, I'm not good at hobbies. They always become jobs, and so
Yeah.
performance poetry ended up becoming my career for 10 years, almost
That's
12, 13 years.
so amazing. Well, and it is like podcasting is that way for that's what I do full time as well. And it's like, wait, I love this. And what do you mean that this gets to be the thing I get to do all day and help
Mm-hmm,
other people
mm-hmm.
do and all that? Your book, you're in version 2 or the second release of this amazing title. No, this is the workbook that I'm holding up, everyone. So we'll edit that part out.
That's fine.
But the body is not an apology. It's right here. And before we dive into more of this, would you tell us about your definition of radical self love and the genesis story of how this all came to be for you?
Yeah. So, I'll start with the definition. Radical self love for me is our inherent um, sense of worthiness, enoughness, our inherent divinity, and our connection to that inherent divinity. And radical self love differs from, in some ways, what we call just self love, what other people talk about when they talk about self love, because radical, I literally mean the definitions of radical, right? Inherent in a thing. And I propose that, our self-love is inherent in us. We came here this way. We came in right relationship with our bodies and the bodies of others. Um, it is speaking to proposing thoroughgoing or extreme change. And I am advocating a love that is thoroughgoing and extreme in its changes to the ways in which we view and understand humans and bodies and identities. And I always say that we already have a very thoroughgoing and extreme way in which we treat bodies today. We're thoroughgoing and extremely violent to bodies that we don't respect. We are cruel to
Hmm.
bodies we don't respect. We are, malicious and mean to our own bodies. We already have that. And so, what does it mean to hold a love that is even at a greater capacity toward our bodies and the bodies of others?
Yeah.
Radical proposes drastic political, economic, and social change. And, for me, that is the key piece of why I do this work, is that I am not interested in tending to anyone's individual self-esteem and self-confidence. While I wish you well, that's well, like I hope that for you, but that doesn't change the material circumstances of my life.
Right.
And I'm interested in the kind of love that changes the material circumstances of the people who have the most marginalized bodies, of the people who are the most disconnected from opportunity, resource, and care. And I believe that divesting from a system where we think we aren't enough is
Hmm.
actually one of the key ways in which we create that world and
Yeah.
alter those systems. So I'm interested in changing the systems of the world, and I'm interested in a love that does that. Um, and then lastly, it's, radical denotes being the foundation of something. And I propose that we have tried building the world on all kinds of things. We've built it on greed and money and power and all of those things. And I mean, we could just look around and see how those experiments have gone. And so I propose, like, what would it look like? I'm in a great experiment. The experiment is, what if we built it on love? What would it look like? And so yeah, so that's what radical self-love is to me and why it is radical.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the origin story, I talk about it in the beginning of the book, but I think that what still tickles me the most is the sort of evolutionary nature of of the body is not an apology and radical self-love.
Yeah.
And, I like to say that it's like a conversation with a friend that became a poem, that became a Facebook post, that became a Facebook page, that became a collection of people who wanted to do things around it, that then became a company, that then became a book, that has become a international movement and framework in how people move through the world. And so that it's almost, I think about it like, when we talk about the Big Bang, and it's like, oh, you started off as an amoeba. And now you're my kid, right? It's like that progression of things, like what something begins as and what it wants to be. It's, the natural intelligence that will make it the fullness of itself has really been kind of the genesis of the body is not an apology.
So I think there's a couple things there. I mean, I'm getting senses that you have somewhat of a religious background in all of that. And one of the things that fascinates me, and I think we're going to jump right on into kind of the ladder and the hierarchy and all of that, is how do we go from a place where even the genesis story of humanity is based in one where the creation is good. We're created in the image of the creator. And yet then we somehow jump into the hierarchy of, if we're looking in the Judeo-Christian, texts, that we are inherently good and that we have inherent divinity, but then we show up and we're very probably not slowly told or explained to that, okay, but it actually works like this. Like, how do we get in that space where it's like, here's the amazing truth. And then, but then you show up and, even in the example of children and babies, when you're like, oh, but we need to circumcise you. Like, what? We're just going to cut off this part.
We immediately need to tinker with you.
Right? Like, just this most sensitive part of you. We're just going to get rid of it.
Right.
Let's talk about that. How do we go from this amazing story of divine, inheritance and then jump to this place of, but it's only for some of these folks
Yeah. I think that there's a lot to be said, even inside of this sort of ethos and the teachings of sort of Christianity, both Protestant and Catholicism. I think there is something around this idea of original sin, right? Because I feel like the message, what we got was, no, you came here perfect, and then y'all messed up in the Garden of Eden. And now everything from there, right? All the rest of you aren't perfect anymore. Now you've actually been born into sin, right? Like that's the narrative right now that I think, most of Christianity lives into. And so if we are operating from the position that we're not inherently good, right? That we're actually inherently sinful. And there are all these things that we have to do to be rectified to God. And so here's where I think it gets, and this is me just talking in real time. Who knows? I'm making all this up, y'all. So don't message me talking about, Sonya, you're a wrong biblical scholar. I'm not a biblical scholar. This is all conjecture. It's me trying an idea. So I think we had this situation where it was like, right, you were good. Nope. Eve messed it up. Now you're all bad. Born into sin. That's the state of the world, unless you're reconciled to God. And reconciliation to God requires the suppression of the flesh, right?
Yeah.
So what we become is, and here's how you end up into dualism, right? We become a spirit constantly trying to reconcile itself to God inside of a body that is irreconcilable. A body that is inherently sinful, right?
Right.
And so we are constantly relating to our bodies as inherently bad, right? And the bodies of others as inherently bad. And
Yeah.
even if you move away from Christianity, right? The ethos of the body as bad and wrong, and the ethos as something external will validate me, right?
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
external thing could be, piousness as the reconciliation to God, or wealth as the reconciliation to one's self-worth, or, power, or whatever it is that is outside of me is what I need to figure out how I then become good enough, because this isn't good enough.
Right. Yes. Well,
That's
and it's
theory.
yeah, conjecture and theory, and well, and that's why I was like, "Ooh, I want to ask this because this is interesting territory." I feel like there is that inherent problem with where we start then, which is
Yeah.
yes, there's the divinity acknowledged, but then there is the fundamental issue with what the flesh and the body then means and how we relate to it, because we're almost told then from the beginning, because you have a body, then you have to do all this reconciliation work, which is why I really wanted to ask you about it. The system has set us up to be very concerned about the flesh and the body from the beginning, even in these places where it's supposed to be a tale of redemption and like love and divinity and all that. So yeah,
And that's why I think it's so important for me, that I question the source of the message. And
yes,
I question the power entities, the power structures and systems that are delivering the message, and what is their buy-in in me believing that I am inherently sinful and bad. Who
right,
wins, right? And I mean, certainly historically, the church as a state entity,
mm,
right, wins if you are controllable, because you are sinful and they are the only thing that can reconcile you to God,
yeah,
right? I grew up Christian, and the work for me has always been whatever story separates me. If I don't believe nothing else in the Bible, but I believe that I was created in my creator's image, then whatever it is that is the manifestation of divinity that made, and the way I think about it is whatever it is that decided that there should be bees and trees and volcanoes and pickles and whatever else also decided that there should be a Sonya Renee Taylor.
yes,
And so I can't be any less divine than all of those creations, right? And
yes,
they are all also manifestations of the divine. And
mm,
so anything that would tell me that I am separated from that which made me, my first instinct is to question that message. Who is that coming from? And what do they have to win by telling me that? Those are the questions that I begin to ask, that begin to at least direct me away from I'm the source of the problem. My body is the source of the problem. And it's like, there's someone else in this game who really benefits from me thinking that I and my body are the source of the problem.
right. Ooh, yeah, and then that leads you into some very interesting places
Yes.
if we, and I believe we are, created in that divine image and in that space of enoughness and worthiness and all of that, just as a tree is, or just as the ocean is, or whatever, then yeah, who is to say, and why would anyone else have the right to say that any of us as
Are not
individuals
enough.
are
Yeah,
not enough? Yeah.
exactly.
That's super powerful. Yes, I'm so glad we went there. Thank you for
Yay.
that.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate you.
First, I want to say a huge thank you to Sonya Renee Taylor for joining me on this episode. It was such an honor to have her on Jumpstart Your Joy. And really, the conversation was mind-blowing to me on so many levels. If you want to hear the whole episode, it originally aired on Jumpstart Your Joy, and that link is going to be below so you can listen to the whole thing over on the podcast. I also want to say thank you so much to Sonya for joining me and sharing this information and putting it out there in an accessible way for so many people. If you would like to support her, as I do on Patreon, you can go over to the link below and sign up for her Patreon. I highly encourage it. You can also purchase The Body Is Not an Apology or The Body Is Not an Apology Workbook. Both are amazing books. If you like what you've heard here, you will surely enjoy these. I hope you'll share this information with someone, because what Sonya's saying is so important to us all. We all need to embrace radical self-love and really question where messages are coming from, why we believe them, and what it means about our own worthiness. I hope you'll tune in to the next video, which is coming right up. I would also love it if you would subscribe to this channel. There'll be more great episodes like this coming out every week. Until then, I hope that your days are filled with so much joy.